The sunken city of Etheria hummed with a symphony of clicks, whirs, and the soft rhythmic thrumming of bioluminescent flora. The Krellian city, a testament to their species' mastery over bioengineering, glowed with an otherworldly beauty beneath the crushing pressure of Etheria's ocean. Within the central research spire, Ilara, her 4 hearts thrumming with anticipation, adjusted her ocular implants for the 10th time. She was eagerly awaiting the arrival of a human, courtesy of the Cultural Exchange Program.
"Are you sure about this, Ilara?"
Dorian, her second-in-command, rumbled, his voice a low vibration that resonated through his scaled throat.
"The Council wasn't thrilled about a human coming here."
"Nonsense, Dorian,"
Ilara dismissed, her antenna twitching with excitement.
"It's a fantastic opportunity. They've never allowed one of their kind outside their system before. Imagine what we might discover."
The laboratory throbbed with an electric tension. It was a testament to Krellian ingenuity. Sleek metallic surfaces gleamed under the soft glow of bioluminescent panels. Advanced scanners stood ready, and containment fields shimmered, poised for activation. Yet, amidst the sterile perfection, Ilara had insisted on a touch of whimsy. A small bubbling tank held a vibrant collection of Earth flora, a splash of chaotic color against the laboratory's silver sheen.
"They seem quite attached to that dirt,"
Dorian observed, eyeing the tank with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Ilara chuckled, a series of chirps and clicks that Dorian had, over their years of working together, learned to decipher.
"The human called it soil, and yes, they seem to have a peculiar fondness for it."
A faint shimmer in the designated arrival platform signaled the imminent arrival of their test subject. Ilara straightened, her 4 fingers tapping her data.
"Activating containment field, now!"
With a resounding crackle of energy, a translucent sphere materialized around the platform. Inside, a young man blinked, looking slightly green and bewildered.
"Ugh, I hate teleportation,"
he muttered, rubbing his temples. He wore a simple garment that Ilara identified as a T-shirt, a baffling choice considering the sterile environment of their lab.
"Welcome to Etheria, human!"
Ilara boomed, her amplified voice echoing in the confined space.
"I am Dr. Ilara, and this is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Dorian. We are xenobiologists."
The human, Finn, blinked again, his gaze darting around the lab.
"Xeno what now?"
Ilara, brimming with scientific enthusiasm, was about to launch into a detailed explanation when a disembodied voice, laden with sarcasm, cut through the air.
"She pokes at aliens for a living, Finn. Try to keep up."
A holographic projection flickered to life beside Finn. It was a young woman, her image shifting slightly with the energy fluctuations of the room. Her arms were crossed, and a bemused smirk played on her lips.
"Lyra,"
Dorian squawked, his reptilian eyes widening.
"They allowed you to bring that?"
"She's not an it, Dorian," Finn retorted, his initial disorientation replaced by a spark of annoyance. "She's my companion."
"Companion?"
Ilara echoed, her ocular implants focusing on Lyra.
"Artificial intelligence," Lyra supplied, rolling her eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, esteemed pokers of aliens."
The Krellian researchers exchanged wary glances. It seemed their human study subject would be far more unpredictable than they had anticipated. Ilara, suppressing a thrill of excitement, couldn't help but think, this is going to be interesting. The initial shock of meeting their first human subject began to wear off, replaced by a flurry of scientific curiosity. Ilara, barely containing her excitement, directed Finn towards a series of diagnostic platforms.
"We'll just run some preliminary scans,"
she explained, her voice buzzing with barely suppressed excitement.
"Standard procedure for all new arrivals in Etheria."
Finn, still looking slightly nauseous from teleportation, shuffled along obligingly. Lyra, her holographic form shimmering beside him, mimicked Ilara's bustling movements with exaggerated precision.
"Oh yes, standard procedure,"
she drawled, her voice dripping with mock seriousness.
"Don't mind us. We're just going to scan your insides with our fancy alien tech. Nothing to see here."
Dorian shot Lyra a withering look, his scaled brow furrowed in disapproval.
Must you be so theatrical?
He hissed, his voice a low rumble. Lyra simply shrugged, a mischievous glint in her holographic eyes.
"Just trying to lighten the mood, Doc. You Krellians could use a little human touch, if you know what I mean."
Ilara, however, was too engrossed in the initial scan readings to pay attention to the byplay. Her ocular implants flickered as she absorbed the data streaming across her datapad.
"Fascinating,"
she murmured, her 4 fingers flying across the touchscreen.
"The cellular density is remarkable. And the neural pathways. Dorian, look at this."
Dorian, still wary of Lyra's presence, moved closer to examine the readings. He, too, couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer complexity of the human physiology displayed on the screen.
Intriguing,
he conceded, his voice tinged with a reluctant admiration.
Their biological makeup is far more robust than the preliminary reports suggested.
It was then that Ilara noticed it, a small but significant blip on the bioscan. It pulsed with a faint orange glow, a stark anomaly against the rhythmic green of the other readings.
"What is this?"
she whispered, her antennae twitching with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. The blip seemed to be originating from... Ilara quickly cross-referenced the anomaly with her database of human anatomy, her fingers moving with a speed that belied her usual clumsiness.
"Dorian,"
she breathed, her voice tight with scientific curiosity.
"I believe our human subject needs to defecate."
A stunned silence descended upon the lab. Dorian stared at Ilara, his jaw slack. Even Lyra seemed to have momentarily run out of sarcastic quips. Finn, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "Defecate? You mean, go number 2? Ilara spun around, her eyes wide with scientific fervor.
"It seems your species has a unique method of waste expulsion. Tell me, human, what is the sensation like?"
Finn's initial embarrassment quickly gave way to amusement. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of a very long, very strange cultural exchange program. The news, like a virus itself, infiltrated every corner of the Krellian network. From the shimmering data streams of Etheria to the farthest outposts orbiting the gas giant Gralak, the news spread. Humans defecate. Ilara had, with characteristic zeal, Dorian would say a complete lack of sense, bypassed the usual scientific channels and uploaded her findings directly to the public archive. An act she now, facing the glowing, judgmental eyes of Marius, the facility director, deeply regretted.
Ilara!
Marius's voice, usually a calm, melodic hum, now buzzed with static, a clear sign of his displeasure.
Explain yourself. Why is the entire network flooded with diagrams of...
He shuddered, his scaled skin rippling.
Human waste disposal?
Ilara shrunk under his gaze, her usual confidence replaced with a sheepish fidgeting of her antennae.
"It's a significant discovery, Marius," she protested,
her voice cracking slightly.
"The implications for understanding organic evolution..."
Marius sputtered, cutting her off.
The only implication is that we've become the laughing stock of the Galactic Consortium!
She glanced nervously at Dorian, who stood rigidly beside her, his expression carefully neutral. He met her gaze briefly, a flicker of weary sympathy in his eyes, before returning his attention to Marius. Meanwhile, oblivious to the chaos brewing above, Finn was getting his first taste of fame, Krellian style. Holographic projections flickered to life around him, showcasing a kaleidoscope of alien news programs. Each one seemed more outlandish than the last, filled with exaggerated graphics and dramatic pronouncements about the human anomaly. One particularly excitable news anchor, with skin like molten gold and eyes that spun like gyroscopes, declared,
"Could this be the weapon that humans have been hiding? A biological terror that could wipe out entire civilizations!"
Lyra, ever the pragmatist, scoffed from her position beside Finn.
Terror? They haven't seen terror until they've experienced a 2-year-old's tantrum in a grocery store.
Finn, trying to make sense of the situation, found himself both amused and slightly terrified. He never thought his digestive system would be the thing to launch him into interstellar notoriety.
It's gone viral, Finn,
Cassia whispered, her normally confident demeanor replaced with a nervous tremor. She'd been assigned to assist Ilara, and Finn had quickly noticed her fascination with him.
The whole network is buzzing.
Great, Finn muttered, rubbing his face. Just what I always wanted, to be famous for pooping. As the news cycle spun further and further out of control, Ilara, Dorian, and even the skeptical Marius began to realize they had a bigger problem on their hands. A problem that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding of human biology. This wasn't just about poop. It was about fear, sensationalism, and the very real possibility that one poorly timed bowel movement could derail interspecies relations for good. The lab, usually a hive of bustling activity, had become a refuge. The incessant pings and chirps of Ilara's datapad, usually a comforting soundtrack to their research, were now a cacophony of doom. Every alert brought another wave of panicked inquiries, scathing critiques from the scientific community, and even threats from Krellians fearing for the sanctity of their digestive systems.
They think we're going to contaminate them,
Ilara lamented, staring at her reflection in the darkened screen of her datapad. The usually vibrant blue of her scales seemed dull, her 4 eyes reflecting the panicked beating of her 4 hearts. Cassia, huddled on a stool nearby, nervously polished her data collection device.
It's all anyone can talk about,
she admitted, her voice barely a whisper.
My spawnlings even asked if they needed to start, you know.
She made a vague gesture with her 4-fingered hand.
Defecating?
Dorian offered dryly, not looking up from the data stream he was attempting to decipher. Cassia winced.
Yes, thought it might be contagious.
A snort from the corner of the lab drew their attention. Finn, seated at a table normally used for dissecting alien flora. Much to Dorian's horror, Ilara had insisted on providing Finn with earth food, which consisted mainly of brightly colored fruits and what looked suspiciously like mud, was watching the spectacle with an odd mixture of amusement and despair. Don't worry, he said, leaning back and cracking a grin. It's not contagious, unless, of course, you count laughter. Ilara's antenna twitched in confusion.
Laughter?
She echoed, her voice a confused chirp. Finn chuckled, shaking his head. You guys are taking this way too seriously. Yeah, it's weird that you glow in the dark to get rid of waste, and yeah, maybe poop isn't the most glamorous thing in the universe, but... He paused, searching for the right words. It's just a part of life. It's natural. Lyra's holographic form shimmered into existence beside him, a mischievous glint in her eyes.
Like breathing, she chimed in, or complaining about the weather, or watching bad reality TV.
Dorian, unable to help himself, let out a sharp bark of laughter. Even Ilara cracked a small smile, the tension easing from her shoulders slightly. It was as if a pressure valve had been released in the sterile lab. The next day, the tension returned in the lab, and it crackled with a palpable energy the Krellians, despite their advanced technology, struggled to quantify. It wasn't the usual hum of scientific curiosity or the frantic buzz of recent panic. This was different. A nervous anticipation, a collective holding of breath. Today was the day Ilara intended to prove, once and for all, the necessity of the human anomaly. Following a particularly spirited rant from Marius involving the words galactic embarrassment and diplomatic incident, the Krellian High Council had demanded a demonstration. A live, irrefutable proof of why this defecation wasn't a biological weapon or a sign of galactic apocalypse, but a fundamental aspect of human existence. Ilara, never one to back down from a challenge, had devised a plan. A plan so audacious, so breathtakingly Krellian in its intricate complexity, that even Dorian had been forced to concede its potential brilliance.
"Are you sure about this, Ilara?"
he'd asked, his usual smooth scales rough with apprehension.
"A holographic simulation of the human digestive tract, projected at a scale large enough for the Council to observe. It hasn't even been tested."
That's the spirit, Dorian!
Ilara had chirped, her antennae practically vibrating with manic energy.
Where's the fun in tested?
And so, in the heart of the sunken city, beneath the watchful eye of the Krellian High Council, projected, of course, for no self-respecting Krellian leader would risk contamination, Ilara prepared for her magnum opus. The lab thrummed with the barely contained energy of the untested holographic projector. Finn, seated in what looked suspiciously like a dentist's chair, Ilara assured him was a relaxation platform, watched the proceedings with a mixture of apprehension and morbid fascination. "You know," he said, leaning towards Cassia, who was adjusting the projector's focusing crystals with nervous precision, "you guys could have just asked me to draw you a diagram." Cassia, her blue skin tinged with green at the edges, shook her head, her crest rippling in amusement.
Where's the fun in that?
Lyra, hovering nearby, snorted.
She's been taking lessons from you, Finn. Soon she'll be dissecting earthworms on the kitchen table.
Before Finn could respond, Ilara clambered onto the raised platform, her datapad clutched in her 4 fingers like a holy relic.
Honorable Council members, she boomed, her voice amplified to fill the vast chamber. Today we will witness a wonder of organic engineering, a process so intricate, so elegant in its efficiency, that it will redefine our understanding of life itself.
Dorian, stationed at the projector controls, shot Ilara a look that could curdle nutrient paste. He then turned to the Council's shimmering projections, his voice a calming counterpoint to Ilara's fervor.
"Dr. Ilara, in her enthusiasm, may be slightly exaggerating the elegant nature of this process,"
he said dryly, adjusting his ocular implants for emphasis. And with that, he activated the projector. The air shimmered, the lab's usual sterile gleam replaced by a swirling vortex of light. Then slowly, majestically, a holographic projection began to materialize. A projection not of starships or distant galaxies, but of, well, Finn's insides. The Krellian Council gasped. Ilara beamed. Finn, staring up at a gargantuan, glowing replica of his own digestive system, felt a wave of nausea wash over him.
"It's beautiful,"
one council member whispered, his voice a mix of awe and disgust. Dorian, with a flourish, zoomed in on the holographic intestines.
"Here,"
he announced,
"we observe the culmination of the human digestive process, the defecation."
The image pulsed a sickly green, and for a horrifying moment, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then the projector shuddered. A high-pitched whine, like a distressed space whale, echoed through the lab.
Dorian, what's happening?
Ilara squawked, her voice laced with panic.
"The power surge,"
Dorian hissed, his scales turning a pale lavender.
"It's overloading the containment field."
And then, with a resounding crack that echoed through the facility, the projection exploded. But this wasn't just light and energy that erupted from the projector. No, this was something far more tangible. A wave of holographic, Matter washed over the stunned onlookers. Glowing green and undeniably poop-shaped, it rained down upon the Krellian council members, who shrieked and scattered, their pristine white robes instantly besmirched. Ilara, covered head to toe in shimmering holographic excrement, could only stare in horror as her masterpiece, her grand experiment, dissolved into a chaotic phosphorescent mess. "Well," said Finn, breaking the stunned silence, "that could have gone better." The silence in the aftermath of the great Krellian poop experiment wasn't the stunned, awestruck kind that followed a scientific breakthrough. This was a thick silence, heavy with the weight of galactic humiliation and the lingering scent of ozone and something else. Something that brought a blush to Cassia's cheek and made even the usually unflappable Lyra flicker nervously. The holographic mess had dissipated, thankfully, leaving behind only a faint shimmer and a thin dusting of what looked suspiciously like glitter on every surface. The Krellian council members, their robes less pristine than before, had hastily logged off their projections, leaving Ilara standing alone on the dais, bathed in the afterglow of her disastrous experiment. She felt Dorian's presence beside her before she heard him speak. His voice, usually a comforting baritone, was barely a murmur.
"Perhaps,"
he said, his scaled hand gently gripping her arm,
"a less literal demonstration would have been advisable."
Ilara, her antennae drooping, could only manage a weak chirp of agreement. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Finn, a sympathetic smile on his face. "Hey," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "At least it wasn't boring, right?" She managed a weak laugh.
Boring? I've just jeopardized interspecies relations with the holographic bowel movement, and you're worried about being bored?
Finn shrugged, leaning against a nearby console that was still emitting faint sparks. "Look, I get it. You were trying to help, to explain things. Didn't go quite as planned, but hey, that's science, right?" He was right, she knew. Ilara prided herself on being a woman of logic, a scientist first and foremost. But somewhere between the Council's demands and her own driving need to prove everyone wrong, she'd let her emotions cloud her judgment.
"You know,"
Cassia said, stepping forward, her voice hesitant but firm,
"Finn's right. We all saw it. We saw what happened. Maybe it's time we stopped focusing on the science of it all and started listening."
Dorian, his eyes widening in surprise, turned to Cassia.
"Listening?"
He echoed, his voice a low rumble.
"Listening to what? The human?"
He shuddered.
"Expulsion schedule?"
Cassia, ignoring his tone, fixed her gaze on Ilara.
"We can study diagrams and dissect samples all day,"
she said, her voice gaining confidence.
"But maybe, just maybe, the key to understanding humans isn't in their biology. It's in their stories."
Ilara met Cassia's gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. For all her advanced technology and meticulous research, she'd forgotten the most basic tenet of scientific inquiry, observation. Not just of data points and biological samples, but of the subject itself.
"You're right,"
Ilara said, her voice regaining its usual strength, though a note of humility tempered its usual fervor.
"Finn, tell us everything about your customs, your habits."
She paused, trying to find the right word.
"Your culture."
Finn, catching the genuine curiosity in Ilara's eyes, smiled. He settled back against the sparking console, ready to finally bridge the galactic gap, one hilarious, awkward, and undeniably human story at a time. He had a feeling this was the start of something different, something real. And as the first rays of Etheria's artificial sun filtered through the lab's observation dome, casting the room in a soft ethereal glow, Finn began to speak. He told them about family dinners and first kisses, about the thrill of competition and the comfort of shared laughter. He told them about music and art, about love and loss, about the messy, confusing, and ultimately beautiful tapestry of the human experience. The tension that had gripped them for days seemed to dissipate, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a shared sense of wonder. The Krellians, captivated by his stories, found themselves laughing along with him, their initial disgust replaced by a grudging admiration. Even Dorian, his skepticism deeply ingrained, found himself leaning closer, his scaled brow furrowed in concentration as Finn spun his tales. Maybe, just maybe, Ilara thought, watching the scene unfold before her, they had stumbled upon something far more profound than they could have ever imagined. Maybe, in the shared act of storytelling, in the simple act of listening and understanding, they could find a way to bridge the gulf between their two species. The great Krellian poop experiment might have been a disaster, but it had also opened a door to a new kind of understanding, a new kind of connection. And Ilara, humbled but more determined than ever, was ready to walk through it. The next day, the Krellian High Council chamber was, as Finn had come to expect, a study in contradictions. It was both breathtakingly beautiful and strangely sterile, a symphony of shimmering bioluminescent panels and smooth metallic curves that would have made any architect on Earth weep with envy. Yet, for all its technological grandeur, it lacked a certain warmth. It was a space designed for efficiency, for logic, for the smooth running of a civilization that prided itself on order and reason. Not exactly the ideal venue for a discussion about the finer points of human bowel movements. Finn adjusted the collar of the loose-fitting tunic Ilara had insisted he wear. Apparently, arriving at a meeting of the Krellian High Council in his Earth clothes would be a cultural faux pas. It felt strange against his skin, like wearing liquid moonlight, but he had to admit the shimmering fabric did make his eyes look bluer.
Relax, Finn.
Lyra's voice, a comforting echo of home amidst the alien grandeur, whispered in his ear. Her holographic form shimmered beside him, her expression a mixture of amusement and cautious optimism.
You've explained the concept of taxes to a toddler. You can handle this.
He wasn't so sure. The council members, their usual shimmering forms replaced by life-size holographic projections, regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. Marius, his scales still a shade paler than usual since the great poop debacle, occupied the central dais, his expression a masterpiece of controlled displeasure. Ilara, however, radiated an almost frantic energy. She paced back and forth in the designated presenter's circle, her datapad clutched in her forefingers like a lifeline. Dorian, his usual stoicism amplified tenfold, stood beside her, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere above the council members' heads. Cassia, stationed near the projector controls, caught Finn's eye and offered him a small, encouraging smile. She was the only reason he'd agreed to this. After the disastrous events of the past few days, Ilara, in a fit of what Dorian could only describe as post-debacle desperation, had proposed this presentation. A chance, she argued, for Finn to explain, in his own words, the cultural significance of the human anomaly. The council, eager to put an end to the galactic gossip mill that was now churning out more rumors about human digestion than a methane moon, had agreed. Finn drew a deep breath, the air tinged with the faint scent of ozone and something akin to wildflowers, and stepped into the circle. He had no notes, no slides, no holographic poop diagrams. He had a story to tell, and he was determined to do it his way. "Honorable council members," he began, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "I know the past few days have been challenging. Let's be honest, none of us expected my digestive system to cause this much of a stir." A ripple of something akin to laughter, or at least the Krellian equivalent, passed through the chamber. "But here we are," Finn continued, and instead of dancing around the issue, I figure it's time we address the elephant in the room. Or rather, well, you know. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Then, with a mischievous grin, he launched into a story. Not a scientific lecture, not a biological treatise, but a story about life on Earth. He told them about his grandfather, a man who could tell you the weather by the smell of the wind, and who swore by the healing power of prune juice. He told them about camping trips gone wrong, about porta-potties at music festivals, about the time his dog ate his homework, and, well, let's just say it involved a lot of explaining to his teacher. He spoke of the shared experience of being human, of the awkward, embarrassing, and often hilarious moments that bound them together. He spoke of the universal language of laughter that transcended species and galaxies, a language that spoke of shared vulnerabilities and the comforting absurdity of existence. As he spoke, he noticed a shift in the council members' demeanor. Their initial skepticism softened, replaced by a grudging amusement, then curiosity, and finally, something akin to understanding. Even Marius, his usually impassive face, twitched with what might have been a suppressed smile. When Finn finished speaking, the silence that followed was no longer heavy with judgment or apprehension. It was the silence of contemplation, of shared experience, of a bridge cautiously crossed. Ilara, her eyes bright with unshed tears, rushed forward, her datapad clattering to the floor, unnoticed.
"You see, council members," she
exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion.
"the human evacuation process. It is not merely a biological function. It is a cultural touchstone, a source of humor, of bonding, of...
Shared humanity?
Dorian offered, his voice laced with disbelief.
Precisely!
Ilara beamed, her antennae practically vibrating with excitement. The council members exchanged glances, their holographic forms flickering as they processed this new information. Finally, a council member with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that shimmered like distant nebulae spoke.
"This has been enlightening, human Finn,"
he said, his voice a deep, resonant hum. Finn, relieved and more than a little exhausted, just nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. He'd heard a lot about the Krellians in the past few days. He'd learned that they were a species driven by logic, by order, by a deep-seated fear of the unknown. But he'd also learned that they were capable of change, of growth, of accepting that sometimes the universe threw you a curveball in the form of a digestive anomaly. As the council members began to fade from view, their holographic projections dissolving into the soft glow of the chamber, Cassia approached Finn, her expression unreadable.
"That was something else,"
she said, her voice low. Finn chuckled. "Yeah, well, I've been told I have a certain way with words, and bodily functions." Cassia laughed, a melodic sound that echoed through the emptying chamber.
"Thank you, Finn,"
she said, her eyes meeting his.
"For everything."
And in that moment, surrounded by the fading echoes of his own improbable story, Finn realized he might just have pulled off the impossible. He had not only explained the human condition to a civilization baffled by bowel movements, but he'd also, perhaps, opened a door to something more. Something that transcended science and politics. Something that spoke to the shared experience of being alive in all its messy, confusing, and ultimately hilarious glory. News of Finn's presentation had quickly spread through the Krellian network. The council, to everyone's surprise, especially Marius's, had issued a formal apology for their initial reaction to the human anomaly, praising Finn's unique approach to interspecies diplomacy. Ilara, basking in the afterglow of their unexpected success, was like a bioluminescent squid in a krill farm, overly enthusiastic, a little all over the place, and positively glowing. She zipped around the lab, her datapad overflowing with new research proposals.
This changes everything,
she declared, nearly tripping over a stack of data modules which Dorian had meticulously organized.
I sincerely hope not,
Dorian muttered, writing the modules with a sigh.
I just finished cleaning up the holographic residue from your last breakthrough.
Ilara waved a dismissive antenna at him.
Don't be such a stick in the mud, Dorian. This is a pivotal moment. Think of it. We can study human eccentricities in a whole new light.
Finn, seated at his usual spot near the Earth flora display, Ilara had, to his relief, stopped trying to feed him nutrient paste, couldn't help but chuckle. Eccentricities? That's one word for it. He had to admit, things had definitely taken a turn for the surprising. After his presentation, the Krellians, it seemed, were eager to embrace all things human. Even the most skeptical council members had bombarded him with questions, some bordering on the absurd.
Is it true,
one had asked, his holographic form shimmering with something akin to Krellian embarrassment,
that humans engage in recreational activities involving inflatable objects shaped like waterfowl?
Finn had choked on his imported from Earth, much to Dorian's dismay, coffee.
Yeah, that's a thing.
The news of Earth's rubber duck obsession had apparently sent shockwaves through the Krellian social media sphere. Who knew a species so obsessed with hygiene could be so fascinated by bath toys? Lyra, ever the pragmatist, had summed it up best.
See, Finn, I told you poop was the great equalizer.
But beneath the humor, Finn sensed a genuine desire to understand, a willingness to bridge the chasm of interspecies awkwardness, and that gave him hope. So, Ilara, he said, leaning back in his chair and watching her flit around the lab, what kind of eccentricities are we talking about studying now? Got any more holographic simulations planned? Ilara's 4 eyes widened, her antennae twitching with excitement.
Oh, Finn, you wound me. No. This calls for a more delicate approach. We've only just scratched the surface of human complexity.
She tapped furiously at her datapad, a mischievous glint in her eyes.
Today, my friend, we delve into the fascinating world of the human sneeze.
Finn's eyebrows shot up. The sneeze? Really? Ilara nodded, her grin widening.
It seems your species has a unique method of expelling air from your nasal passages.
Dorian groaned, massaging his temples with 2 of his 4 fingers.
Ilara, please don't tell me you've been uploading human allergy videos to the network again.
Ilara, ignoring him, turned back to Finn, her eyes gleaming with scientific fervor.
Tell me, Finn, when a human sneezes, does it glow?
Finn burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the lab, a sound of hope, of connection, of the messy, beautiful chaos of 2 very different species finding common ground, one sneeze and one poop joke at a time.